Koscheck walks into enemy territory to take the title. Danzig and Stevenson set out to prove who is the toughest, and can Alves make 170 at 124? This is the Fight Network's preview of UFC 124. Hey there, fight fans. My name is John POLLOCK, and this is the Fight Network's preview of UFC 124, which will take over the city of Montreal this coming weekend. John Ramsden will be joining me in just a couple of minutes as we will break down the entire main card, which will feature a lightweight bout between Jim Miller and Charles Oliveira, a battle of two former Ultimate Fighter winners, and the main event is a rematch for the welterweight gold. The main event of UFC 124 will pit both coaches from this past season of The Ultimate Fighter, as 20-2 UFC welterweight king Georges St-Pierre will defend the title against Ultimate Fighter 1 alumni and AKA product Josh Koscheck. The NCAA Division I wrestler enters this bout with a record of 15-4 and a 3-fight win streak as he attempts to avenge his 2007 unanimous decision loss to the Quebec native.
I think that Georges St-Pierre is going to retain his title. He's such a dominant fighter. He's a complete package.
O Georges St-Pierre tem gasolina azul, né? Gasolina de avião. O gás dele não para, um atleta que tem que ser... Quem sonha entrar no Vale Tudo, quem como eu tive o Vanderlei como inspiração, acho que ele é um grande atleta para todo mundo se espelhar, que ele é um exemplo de atleta e acho que com certeza ele vai levar essa luta aí.
I think Georges St-Pierre is going to win, and actually, he wouldn't have been a bad one to put on the helmet. He is great. He's one of the greatest fighters of all times, for sure.
I think if Koscheck can keep it on the feet, it's 50-50. It's anybody's fight. I think GSP's, I think he deserves it more, GSP. He's fighting in Montreal. He's had to deal with Koscheck for 6 weeks on The Ultimate Fighter, which I don't know how he's managed to deal with Koscheck, because I won't be able to. I think it's GSP's fight, but it's a very, very close one.
GSP always, he mixes it up pretty well, and he knows how to squeak out a win. He knows how to, everybody loves a winner, so.
Staying true to the etiquette that exemplifies a martial artist, Georges St-Pierre has personified the role of the good guy. As a result, the French-Canadian has cultivated a worldwide fan base and become one of the biggest attractions in modern mixed martial arts.
When I won my title in Montreal by fighting Matt Serra in UFC Montreal, that's when the biggest change happened. Right after that day, I remember I was walking in the street and people recognized me a lot, Before that, I used to be completely unknown. But not completely, it happened once in a while, but it was pretty rare. And now it's every day, everywhere I go.
Apart from the physical challenge, the dynamic of hero versus villain has been introduced to build intrigue. And Season 12 of The Ultimate Fighter has aided this notion. Understanding that every hero needs a villain, the ever-brash Josh Koscheck has accepted the role with open arms.
It's part of the sport, and I'm concerned with what I got to do. I don't really care too much about trash talking. I don't care, what he's doing. I'm focused on myself. It's been a long road to get here, and I'm not going to let this opportunity slip by.
Known for his cocky attitude and psychological warfare, Koscheck has used these traits to his advantage.
Let's have a show of hands who likes Josh Koscheck. Who's a fan of Josh Koscheck? What, 7, 8? 7. My opinion is if you like Josh Koscheck, then you've not met the guy. That's my opinion.
The AKA pupil can talk the talk, and he has proven he can walk the walk.
Thing, Josh is the biggest black hat in the sport. He takes pride in it, and he's a nice guy outside of that. If you meet him, he's a really cool guy. What he does in the octagon, what he does prepping up for fights, a lot of it is mind games that he learned from a very successful career as an amateur wrestler.
A fighter can learn a lot in 3 years, and both St-Pierre and Koscheck have morphed into different fighters.
There's an argument there that Koscheck perhaps learned more about that fight than GSP did. The problem is George is always improving. He is always getting better. He comes away with every fight looking to learn again and again and again. And George isn't that kind of guy who's going to rest on his laurels and say, I beat him last time, that's going to be enough this time. No. George has improved tremendously since that fight, and perhaps even more than Koscheck.
I always tell George all the time, I go, everybody who tells you that this next fight is easy and that nobody can challenge you doesn't know anything about fighting. If Koscheck lands a good punch, he can win. If he gets a good position on the ground, he can win. I mean, anybody can win. It's probability. There's no given. And the people going in there and eating the punches, they understand that better than the people watching the fight.
The first encounter between St-Pierre and Koscheck occurred back at UFC 74. After coming off his shocking TKO loss to Matt Serra, an approved St-Pierre out-wrestled and outpointed Koscheck en route to a decision win. Subsequently, the Canadian would go on to recapture his title and show mass improvements in every performance. So much so that he has positioned himself way ahead of the welterweight pack.
With George, he's so refined in every stage. You have to start looking for weaknesses, and it starts getting a little harder, and you have to be very creative in stimulating his system to produce new gains. And it's just about being creative and always exposing his body to something new. But when he's done everything, you know, it's kind of hard to keep doing that.
Recently enlisting the services of world-class boxing trainer FREDDIE ROACH, St-Pierre is no stranger to seeking out the best resources in order to be the best come fight night.
His boxing ability is getting a lot better. He's getting a lot looser. He's not he's trying to loosen up. He's not so tight like normal. And he's a great student. I mean, because I show him something, next day he's got it pretty much down.
Despite the praise, St-Pierre has faced criticism, but it is something that will not faze the champion.
You know, I think if you look at the Hardy fight, I think there's a lot of risk there, and I think, I mean, he was an inch away from getting an armbar. He was an inch away from getting Kimura, and just that 1 inch, you know, if he had gotten it, everybody would have hailed him as a genius. He would have got a first-round armbar. He would have got third-round Kimura. He would have been hailed as a genius. But because of 1 little inch of a difference, now he's a slow starter, or he's not a finisher, etc. Criticism is always going to be there, but people don't understand is that they make the fighters out to be so big, and the imagination runs so wild. I mean, Hardy's a very tough guy to finish. I mean, it could happen. He might be finished one day. It might happen, but it's a very difficult thing to do. Because something is difficult doesn't make it impossible, but it is very difficult. The guy's very seasoned. He's been training his whole life. I mean, to go in there and say, okay, finish John Fitch, I mean, you know, it's not as easy as everybody thinks. It's incredibly difficult.
San Jose, California is the home of the acclaimed American Kickboxing Academy, and it is here where Koscheck is transformed from a sprawl and brawl fighter to a well-rounded mixed martial artist.
Transitional ability is key in all combative sports. Wrestling, judo, kickboxing, whatever it is. So for Koscheck, I'm working on his transitional ability. He needs to be a wrestler for 0.5 seconds and a kickboxer for the next 0.5 seconds and be able to rotate back and forth. If his opponent's expecting him to shoot, he's going to strike. If he's striking and his opponent's ready for that, he's going to shoot. You have to disguise your approach. That's the bottom line.
Entering the octagon with a profound wrestling base, this welterweight contender has recently shown developments in his striking and submissions, all the while maintaining his conditioning attributes.
The guy that controls the pace of the fight, he's the guy that's gonna look more fresh. The guy that doesn't control the pace of the fight, he's the guy that's gonna be the more tired.
You know, the good thing about fighting Koscheck is that he's had so many fights out there. You know, you've seen him fight for so many years now. You've seen him develop. He's definitely changed his style. You know, he's added new things. He's obviously very different than when he fought on The Ultimate Fighter, and there's a lot of footage on him.
Koscheck, he's kind of dangerous. You know, he's not like a nobody. The last fight, a little bit of the game plan was to wrestle him, crush him in his comfort zone.
Underestimating George's wrestling. He's not going to do that this time around.
And it totally took him apart. You know, he was like, I'm the wrestler and I'm getting wrestled, but it was too late for him to do anything about it. It was a comfort zone of his. It was a lot of just done. And he couldn't, in the end, I think in the last round, he actually said to George in the fight, well done, George, you've won. This is your fight, you've got it. And he's saying that while he's on the floor getting, you know, wrestled.
And if you think about it, nobody's ever really shot at him other than George. Nobody's ever really tested his takedown defense other than George. So there's a bit of a very, X factor there. But again, it's not about wrestling. It's about shoot boxing. That's what we're going there to do. And I think George is the best shoot boxer in the world.
In modern MMA, it is the athlete who supersedes, and this is a battle that will decide which athlete is the better fighter. The trash talking is over, emotions are running high, and the second chapter to this feud will come to a conclusive end at the Bell Center.
Joining us to break down UFC 124, John Ramdine here. John, the main event, it's a rematch from UFC 74 all the way back in August of 2007. In that fight, we saw Georges St-Pierre actually out-wrestle Josh Koscheck. Since that time, Koscheck focusing much more on what brought him to the dance, that being his wrestling. Is that going to be the case this Saturday when we have two guys with tremendous wrestling geared for mixed martial arts?
Well, for Georges St-Pierre, if you can't take this fight down to the ground, he is more than happy to stand and trade. That's been the game plan all along, to use the strikes to set up the takedown, and if the takedown's not there, well, he's going to try to beat him standing, and I think that's the key for St-Pierre in this fight.
This past weekend, you were in Montreal at the TriStar Gym, getting to see firsthand the workout routine for Georges St-Pierre. Tell us a little bit about his mindset and how he's looking just 7 days out from that fight.
He considers this fight to be the biggest fight of his career. He's taken it that seriously, and he's brought in some of the best guys in the world. We saw Kenny Florian, Rory McDonald, Nate Marquardt, really a who's who in the world of mixed martial arts, and he has to do that in order to face a guy who many people consider a top 5 in Josh Koscheck.
How about the build-up for this fight? Obviously, the backdrop has been The Ultimate Fighter Season 12. Josh Koscheck, to me, has played the perfect heel as a foil for Georges St-Pierre. It's generated a ton of interest heading into Saturday night.
Yeah, a lot of interest, but what it's also done, it's given George extra motivation for this fight. He's actually taken it personally, and it shows in the training gym. Lots of guys out there, the guys that train with George, say that they've never been pushed this hard in their training camps, and it's just a testament to what type of fighter George is, and he takes the fight very seriously, and he wants to go down as not just the best welterweight in the world, but the best pound-for-pound fighter of all time, and the way to do it is to take every threat seriously.
Is there a pressure on Georges St-Pierre and his camp to finish the fight, coming off of the criticism in the Dan Hardy fight that George is fighting to win but not to finish?
Well, I don't think they focus on that. If there's an opportunity to finish the fight, St-Pierre's camp says they're going to take it, but if it means that they have to go 5 rounds, 25 minutes, they'll do that as well. What's interesting is you heard it on the show, the word shoot boxing. Firas Zahabi also talked about shoot boxing, and it's the transitions from, if I understand it correctly, is to be prepared in every avenue of the fight and in between. So in between jiu-jitsu and wrestling, there's a place for shoot boxing, and I think that's what we're going to see of Georges St-Pierre. He's going to be a guy completely well-rounded. He's not going to let the crowd affect him. He's not going to let the paychecks affect him, although we're all affected by paychecks. And he's going to go in there, the best Georges St-Pierre, and I think he's going to bring it to Koscheck.
It's going to be one of the most electric atmospheres for any UFC fight in history. On Saturday night, is the hometown hero Georges St-Pierre going to have his hand raised?
I would expect so, but don't forget Josh Koscheck is super athletic. He's got big power, and he trains at one of the best camps in the world. So anything is possible. Koscheck throws those big winging punches, and if you connect with one of those, it could be lights out for St-Pierre, but I highly doubt it. I think the French-Canadian will retain his title, probably by finish somewhere in the 2nd or 3rd round, but more likely it'll be a decision win.
Undefeated heavyweight trash talker Sean McCorkle will look to improve to 11-0 Saturday night, facing the toughest challenge of his career in the skyscraper Stefan Struve, who will enter the octagon at an astonishing 6 feet 11, a solid 4 inches over McCorkle, and a record of 20-4. Struve's only losses inside the UFC have come at the hands of Junior Dos Santos and Roy Nelson. John, a heavyweight showdown between Stefan Struve and Sean McCorkle. How did these two find themselves second from the top on one of the biggest pay-per-views of the year?
It shows you the power of the underground. Sean McCorkle posted enough times that the UFC brass took notice, and of course he got a shot, and he won over a very tough Mark Hunt. But he's going to have his hands full because he's facing a guy that I believe to be the future of the heavyweight division in Stefan Struve.
Yeah, with Stefan Struve, we go back to UFC 117. I mean, this guy was dominated in that first round by Christian Moorcraft, but then came back in the second round and finished him in under a minute into the second round. Looked phenomenal with that recovery after round 1.
Exactly. This is a guy that is 22 years old. We've seen that he can take a beating. He is massive, and he's faced some of the best guys in the division, including Junior Dos Santos and Roy Nelson. That's why, and if you look at his interview with Ariel Helwani, this guy just has a mentality and devotion to the sport that I'm sure, again, a heavyweight title will be around his waist at one point in time.
Sean McCorkle is a guy we've only seen once inside of the UFC, defeating Mark Hunt earlier this year in September, a guy that has finished fights decisively, 7 of his fights ending in under 2 minutes. Very impressive ground and pound, and he's shown some submission skill.
And the ground and pound is the key in this fight. If McCorkle can get on top of Struve, Struve, known as a jiu-jitsu player, looks for sweeps and submissions, and that's where McCorkle can take advantage, put Struve on his back, use that ground and pound to get the victory, although it's going to be very tough. We've seen what type of abuse Stefan Struve can take.
I'm picturing Sean McCorkle coming out with a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey and cutting a great promo after this fight. Will he be the winner, though?
I don't think so. I think Stefan Struve is too good off of his back. I think he's too good standing, and I think this will be the fight that a lot of people take notice.
It's going to be an action-packed lightweight affair when 18-2 Jim Miller attempts for his 6th straight victory inside of the UFC when he tangles with 20-year-old phenom Charles Oliveira. The 14-0 Brazilian entered the UFC with an amazing performance against Darren Elkins this past August and then submitted TUF Season 8 winner Efrain Escudero in September. John, a big lightweight bout taking place between Jim Miller and Charles Oliveira. Let's first chat about Oliveira. This kid is only 20 years old. He debuted this past summer, made Darren Elkins look like our editor Tyler Thornley on the ground, and just made him an embarrassing defeat on his record. Let's first talk about Oliveira.
Yeah, this kid is a future superstar, 20 years old, you said it. He's super explosive, has great submissions, he's very, very tough, and again, I'm sure there's big things to come from the Brazilian, but John, he's facing a very tough Jim Miller, a very underrated guy who has good submissions, good wrestling, super tough, and will put the pressure on you at all times. So I think Oliveira, obviously it is the toughest test of his career, and he's just got to make sure that he understands what type of fighter he's facing.
Jim Miller is one of the most unheralded lightweights, I think, in the industry right now. Only 2 losses on his career, those to Frank Edgar and Gray Maynard, a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to go along with his NCAA wrestling background. This guy, to me, a win here, he has to be in line for a title shot.
Yeah, the unfortunate part is nobody knows his name, and it's hard to sell a guy if people don't know who he is. I think Jim Miller just keeps doing what he's doing, keeps beating the best guys they put in front of him, and eventually a title shot will come. I just don't know if that's now or 2 years from now.
Miller is a guy, he tends to grind out a lot of victories here. We have seen a lot of decisions on his record. Is there going to be a pressure to finish here and impress Joe Silva to try and get his name across more?
You'd expect that would be the focus of all the fighters, but when you're facing a guy like Oliveira who's explosive, very athletic, and hard to contain, I think Miller's going to have to go back to his roots, use that wrestling and jiu-jitsu style to grind it out and get a unanimous decision win.
So this Saturday, are you saying it's Miller time?
I am saying it's Miller time, although I'm sure I'll be drinking a Sleeman.
The winners of Ultimate Fighter Seasons 2 and 6 will meet Saturday night with 19-8-1 Mac Danzig and 36-11 Joe Daddy Stevenson. Despite Danzig's respectable record, he has only gone 3-4 inside the UFC and comes off a very controversial loss to Matt Wyman at UFC 115 in June. Stevenson has won 2 of his last 3, defeating Nate Diaz and Spencer Fisher before dropping a unanimous decision to Georges St-Pierre at UFC 110 in February. A battle of 2 Ultimate Fighter winners here, John and Mac Danzig taking on Joe Stevenson. For Mac Danzig, he's 3-4 inside of the octagon. His last loss this past June against Matt Wyman, very heartbreaking loss as he was in a guillotine, was not out, but the referee unfortunately thinking he was. Facing elimination here from the UFC if he loses this fight.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing because both guys have faced some of the toughest and top guys in their division, and that's just the way it is, and especially in the UFC. You're really in tough against any of the top 155-pound fighters, whether it's number 20 or number 1. It's going to be a tough battle. What both guys have to do is they have to come out and fight. They have to put on a show. They have to showcase their skills, showcase the fact that they're veterans of both the UFC and mixed martial arts, and impress that way. And that's the way they'll stick around.
With Stevenson, I always go back and look at that fight at UFC 95 against Diego Sanchez. He came in very flat, was very predictable on his feet, and as a result, Diego just picked him apart. Coming out of that fight, he changed up his training, and it led to victories over Spencer Fisher and Nathan Diaz. Then ran into Georges St-Pierre, where he was just controlled for 3 rounds, and he's at a similar kind of crossroads in his career.
I think the most important for both guys is to leave it all inside of the cage on Saturday night. If they want to keep their jobs, they got to fight hard. They got to try to finish each other, and if they have a great performance, win, lose, or draw, I think the UFC will keep these guys around.
So who will be the Ultimate Fighter winner on Saturday?
I think if Joe Stevenson uses the game plan to put Mac Danzig on the ground, although it's not going to be an easy task, if he does that, stays on top, I think he can ground out a 3-round decision.
All right, so there we go. And the loser gets a Strikeforce lightweight title shot. In a fight that may have more focus on the weigh-ins than the actual fight, Thiago Elvis will be given 1 more attempt to successfully make 170 pounds after 2 past infractions. The 17-7 American top team member will get that opportunity against 14-5 John Howard, who has been victorious in 4 of his 5 UFC bouts, including wins over Tamden McCrory and Dennis Hallman. John, the big question here is not the fight and who's going to win. Thiago Elvis, is he going to make 170 pounds? He's incorporated the help of Mike Dolce and gotten on the Dolce diet, whatever that means. Will he hit 170?
Yeah, he has a responsibility to make sure that he makes 170 pounds. He's facing a guy that not a lot of people know, so if he comes in and he blows it and doesn't make 170, you'll see him drop further and further down the position on the pay-per-view. So
and higher on the scales.
Exactly. So Thiago Alves knows that he has to come into this fight at 170 pounds or 171, give or take, and I think he'll be prepared.
He's going to be taking on a guy in John Howard who has looked very impressive in the UFC, coming off a loss to Jake Ellenberger. Tell us a bit about John Howard and what problems he could present for Thiago.
He's got to close the distance. He's got to allow Thiago Alves to not get off, not use his range, and not use those powerful strikes. If he gets in close, tries to wear down Thiago Alves, and then try to get the fight down to the ground and try to exploit Thiago Alves' weaknesses on the ground, I think he can be successful. But as we saw, Josh Koscheck had a very hard time taking down Thiago Alves, and when he got him down, it's hard for him to contain him. So it's going to be a very, very difficult task for John Howard, but when you're facing one of the best welterweights in the world, there's no easy fights at this point.
And coming in for Alves here, I mean, he's coming off of 2 losses, one to Georges St-Pierre and the other, I think you can almost throw the Fitch fight out. He had an atrocious weight cut and was zapped of all his energy. I think and hope we see a renewed energy from the Pitbull.
I think we will. I think he's one of the most exciting fighters in the world. You look at his Thai boxing abilities, his big power, his flying knees. If he does get careless like that, he could play right into the hands of Howard, and Howard's a very underrated welterweight, and I think he's out to make his statement.
Are we going to see that statement in the form of an upset, though?
I think no. I think Thiago Alves is still considered one of the top 5 in the division for a reason. I think he's going to end this fight in emphatic fashion, probably a 2nd or 3rd round TKO stoppage.
No carbs until the fight, Thiago.
Don't go anywhere. When we come back, it's a look at the undercard of UFC 124, featuring tons of Canadian fighters, including Mark Bocek, Jesse Bongfeld, and Sean Pearson.